There is a word that AccuWeather meteorologist Brandon Buckingham used this week that I want you to hold on to. He did not use the word storm. He did not use the word outbreak. He used the word marathon. And when a certified broadcast meteorologist uses a word like that to describe a severe weather setup, it is not a casual choice. It is a clinical assessment of what he and every other forecaster tracking the central United States right now is staring at. A stretch of consecutive dangerous weather days so long, so relentless, and so geographically broad that it resembles not a single event but an endurance test, a gauntlet, something that runs and keeps running long after you expect it to stop. Before we go any further, if you find value in what we do here at Project Nightwatch, hit like and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Because depending on your answer, this video may be talking about your backyard. Here's the question I want you to hold in your head for the next several minutes. Why are meteorologists, people trained to describe weather systems in measured and precise language, reaching for a word like marathon? What does that word actually communicate that storm or outbreak does not? The answer is not about wind speed. It is not about hail size. It is not even about tornado count. The answer is about pattern. It is about a pattern of atmospheric behavior that has settled over the central United States and refused to move. A pattern that has been generating dangerous, severe weather not once, not twice, but day after day after day. And the reason that pattern is sitting there, locked in place, grinding through community after community, is the real story. And the reason it is only getting more dangerous in the days ahead, starting right now today, April 26, 2026, is what every meteorologist in this country is quietly terrified about. Let me give you the numbers first, because the numbers are the only way to understand why the word marathon is not an exaggeration. It is a diagnosis. On March 10th, 2026, an EF5 tornado with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour tore through Wells County, Indiana. That was only the second EF5 tornado in the United States since 2013. A 13-year drought of the most violent class of tornado ended in Indiana in early spring. That should have been the headline of the season. It was not, because the season did not stop. By mid-April, the National Weather Service office in Chicago had already issued more tornado and severe thunderstorm warnings than it typically records through the entire month of May. Let that sit with you. Not through April, through May, the full month of May. Before May had even arrived, Chicago had blown past its usual warning count for that month, and Chicago was not alone. NWS offices across the plains and Midwest were reporting similar patterns. The system was not behaving like a typical spring. Through April 19th, the state of Illinois had recorded 80 tornado reports. The state that historically leads the nation in tornado reports by mid-April is Texas, then Mississippi, then Alabama, not Illinois. But in 2026, the jet stream shifted. It moved north. It parked itself over the Midwest rather than the southern plains. And wherever the jet stream parks, the severe weather follows, because the jet stream is the organizing force that turns raw atmospheric instability into structured, dangerous storms. Illinois, by April 23rd, had surpassed 99 confirmed tornadoes, nearly double the state's average for that date. That number was still being revised upward as survey teams worked the field. Nationally, 274 tornado reports had come in across the United States through the first 3 months of 2026, with 196 of those concentrated in March alone, making it the third most active March on record. And yet forecasters were saying at the start of the season that total tornado counts for 2026 would run near the historical average of about 1,225 for the full year. The math is not working. The activity that was supposed to be spread across spring and summer was front-loading. It was stacking in March and April, and the atmosphere was not showing any signs of emptying its reservoir. To understand why a pattern like this develops and refuses to let go, you have to understand what meteorologists mean when they talk about the jet stream. The jet stream is a fast-moving river of air in the upper atmosphere, typically 20,000 to 35,000 feet above the surface, moving at speeds that can reach 100 to 200 miles per hour. It acts as a dividing line between cold polar air to the north and warm tropical air to the south. In the spring, when those two air masses are at their most contrasting, the jet stream becomes the engine of severe weather. It creates the wind shear that allows thunderstorms to rotate. It provides the lifting force that allows storms to explode upward. It organizes the atmosphere into the exact configuration that generates supercells, the structured rotating thunderstorms that produce the most violent tornadoes. In a typical spring, the jet stream arcs across the southern plains, draping over Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, the historical heart of Tornado Alley. Moisture flowing north from the Gulf of Mexico runs into that jet stream and sparks the season's biggest outbreaks. But in 2026, the jet stream has been positioned further north. Its average track through March and April has been centered more over the Midwest. AccuWeather meteorologist Alexander Duffus made this specific observation when explaining why Illinois had become the unexpected leader in severe weather reports. The jet stream plays a large role in organizing severe weather in the spring, he said, and this year its average position has been centered more over the Midwest than the southern plains. That is not a trivial shift. Population density in the Midwest corridor from Iowa through Illinois into Indiana and Michigan is significantly higher than traditional Tornado Alley in the plains. When the same atmospheric machinery that typically churns over the open Texas panhandle or western Kansas instead churns over Chicago, over St. Louis, over Indianapolis, over Milwaukee, the human exposure changes dramatically. More people are in the path. More infrastructure is vulnerable. More communities face the direct experience of a tornado watch lighting up their phones day after day, week after week. That is what makes the jet stream shift in 2026 so significant. The atmosphere is still doing what it does in spring, but it is doing it over a different zip code. Now let me walk you through what this marathon stretch actually looked like in practice, because the word marathon becomes far more visceral when you trace it day by day. On April 14th and 15, a severe weather outbreak battered Wisconsin and Michigan. Flood watches covered areas expecting up to 5 inches of rain. The Storm Prediction Center flagged eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, and southern Wisconsin as the core threat zone. A ground stop was issued at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, one of the busiest aviation hubs in North America, because the storms were so intense that aircraft could not safely operate. Wind gusts hit 88 miles per hour. Giant hail came down across multiple states. More than 14 million people faced active tornado threats on April 15th alone, as the system rolled east into Michigan. Then, on April 17th, a significant tornado outbreak hit the upper Midwest. Thunderstorms developed in early afternoon along a cold front in southeast Minnesota and along a warm front in western Wisconsin. The NWS Green Bay office recorded tornadoes in Marathon County, Wisconsin, in the towns of Ringgold and Weston. Homes were damaged. An EF3 tornado tore through Buffalo County with winds that leveled structures. An EF2 multi-vortex tornado tracked through Lena, Illinois, with peak winds around 130 miles per hour, ripping apart trees and rooftops across the community. More than 50 million people had been in the path of that outbreak, and the season had barely paused to breathe. Less than a week later, on April 23rd, came the event that escalated everything. On Thursday evening at 8:22 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the National Weather Service office in Norman, Oklahoma, issued a tornado emergency for southeast Enid. A tornado emergency is not a standard tornado warning. It is the most urgent category of warning in the NWS system, reserved for confirmed violent tornadoes that are directly threatening populated areas. The language in a tornado emergency is not cautionary. It is imperative. What followed was the first EF4 tornado of 2026. It was on the ground for 9 miles. Its peak winds were measured at 170 to 175 miles per hour. It was approximately 500 yards wide at its largest. At 8:22 p.m., it passed directly over Vance Air Force Base, one of the United States military's primary pilot training facilities. The base lost power and water. It was closed until further notice. In the Gray Ridge neighborhood on Enid's south side, homes were not damaged. They were obliterated. Structures were swept clean from their foundations. Vehicles were flipped. Buildings were pushed off concrete slabs. 40 to 50 homes suffered severe to catastrophic damage. 10 to 15 people were injured. Remarkably, no one died. This was the first EF4 in Garfield County, Oklahoma, since April 26, 1991, more than 34 years. The strongest tornado in the United States since an EF5 struck Enderlin, North Dakota, in June 2025. That same night, a satellite tornado formed near Brahman, Oklahoma, a smaller vortex orbiting around a parent tornado in the same supercell, a phenomenon so rare that storm chasers who have spent careers in the field described it as one of the most extraordinary things they had ever documented. More than 148 total reports of hail, damaging winds, and at least 20 confirmed tornadoes came in across Oklahoma and Iowa alone on that single night. The word marathon is starting to make more sense, but April 23rd was not the end of the sequence. It was not even the peak. That is the part that has meteorologists genuinely concerned. On April 24th, more supercells dropped tornadoes and tennis ball-sized hail in southern Oklahoma. On April 25th, NOAA upgraded the risk for southeastern Oklahoma to a level 4 out of 5, what they call a moderate risk, with the potential for baseball-sized hail and strong tornadoes continuing. The Storm Prediction Center was tracking hail reports of 4 inches in diameter near Marion, Kansas, and 3.75 inches at Bremen, Oklahoma. A 4-inch hailstone is the size of a softball. When it falls from 30,000 feet, it carries kinetic energy capable of destroying a car roof, breaking through shingles to the roof deck below, and killing anyone caught outdoors without shelter. For April 26th, today, the severe weather outlook shows a 10% tornado probability, a 45% hail probability, and a 30% wind probability across portions of the Central Plains and Midwest. Those numbers sound manageable until you understand that they are applied across an area covering millions of people, and that the tornado probability of 10% on a given day translates, in practice, to an environment where supercells are expected to develop, and several tornadoes are considered likely within the highest risk corridor. And then there is Monday. April 27 is the day that has forecasters using language they do not use casually. The Storm Prediction Center's official discussion for Monday describes a surface low deepening to sub 1,000 millibars, migrating from east central Kansas through eastern Iowa during the day, trailing a dry line just ahead of a cold front, a 70-plus knot southwesterly jet streak aloft. Discrete supercells developing initially with potential for large hail and strong tornadoes, then growing upscale into an organized convective system capable of producing embedded supercell structures with additional tornado risk as they move into the lower Ohio Valley by late evening. In plain language, Monday is shaping up as a textbook outbreak setup. The Storm Prediction Center has already flagged a level 4 out of 5 moderate risk for a large portion of Illinois. Forecasters are describing it as the highest confidence significant severe weather setup of the 2026 season so far for that state, with a 60% or greater probability of severe weather across the core zone. They are explicitly calling for the possibility of long-tracked intense EF3 or stronger tornadoes from Monday afternoon into Monday night. That phrase, long-tracked, is important. Most tornadoes are brief. They touch down, move a mile or two, and lift. A long-track tornado is one that stays on the ground continuously for many miles, sometimes dozens of miles. The 2011 Tuscaloosa-Birmingham tornado traveled 80 miles on the ground without lifting. Long-track tornadoes are disproportionately deadly because they cover more ground, destroy more structures, and allow less time for the populations in their path to respond, especially after dark when visibility is gone and people in mobile homes and vulnerable structures have no reliable warning beyond the sound of the wind changing. Cities in the risk zone for Monday include Chicago, Indianapolis, St. Louis, Kansas City, and Memphis. These are not small towns in the open plains. These are major metropolitan areas with millions of residents, dense housing, international airports, hospitals, and interstate corridors that will need to remain operational during and after any significant event. AccuWeather's meteorologists upgraded their severe weather outlook for Monday's corridor to high risk, the second highest category on their scale, reserved for events that frequently feature widespread damaging wind gusts or dozens of tornadoes. The last time they issued a high risk was during a stretch earlier this month when 80 tornadoes were reported in the central United States on a single day. The question I keep coming back to, the one that this video is really asking, is not just how bad is this stretch? The question is why. Why is this happening this way? Why is the atmosphere locked into a configuration that has been generating danger day after day after day across a corridor running from Oklahoma to Wisconsin? And the answer is partly in the jet stream positioning we already discussed, but it goes deeper than that. The atmospheric pattern driving the 2026 marathon stretch is being shaped by larger scale climate signals, particularly the transition from La Nina toward El Nino that is underway across the Pacific Ocean. La Nina, the cooling of sea surface temperatures in the central and eastern tropical Pacific, is associated with specific changes in the global atmospheric circulation. It tends to increase the intensity and frequency of the jet stream pattern that, in North America, funnels cold Arctic air deep into the continent and moisture-laden Gulf air northward simultaneously. When both air masses are at their most energized, and they collide across the central United States, the atmosphere becomes, in the language of operational meteorology, highly favorable for supercell development. The La Nina to El Nino transition in 2026 has been specifically compared by forecasters to the patterns preceding the devastating 1974 and 2011 seasons. The 1974 super outbreak produced 148 confirmed tornadoes in a single 24-hour period, including 30 F4 and F5 tornadoes, making it the most violent tornado outbreak in recorded history. The 2011 season produced the Joplin tornado that killed 158 people, the single deadliest tornado in American history since 1947, and the Alabama outbreak of April 27, 2011, that produced 62 tornadoes in a single day. Nobody is saying 2026 will replicate those seasons. Forecasters are specifically careful to avoid that kind of projection. But the atmospheric setup that produced those seasons has structural similarities to the setup that is generating what Brandon Buckingham called the marathon. That analog is not a prediction. It is a reference point. It is the weather pattern the current one most closely resembles. And when you understand what those reference points produced in 1974 and 2011, the word marathon stops sounding like a metaphor. There is another dimension to this that most of the news coverage misses, and I think it is the one that matters most for the communities actually living through it. The marathon is not just physically exhausting, it is psychologically exhausting. And the psychological dimension of repeated, severe weather exposure has consequences that play out in ways that are not immediately visible in damage reports or tornado counts. When a community receives a tornado watch, a certain level of alertness activates. People check radar. Parents think about where their children are. Businesses assess whether to close early. Emergency managers preposition resources. All of that takes effort. All of that costs something. When the storm passes without producing a tornado in that specific location, the alertness gradually relaxes. And the next time the watch comes, the same process has to activate again, and the time after that, and the time after that. Across the Midwest, residents from central Illinois to eastern Kansas have been describing a relentless cycle of watch and warning notifications lighting up their phones since the beginning of spring. That cycle is not benign. Research on behavioral responses to repeated weather warnings shows that prolonged exposure to alerts can produce what is sometimes called warning fatigue, a psychological phenomenon where populations become progressively less responsive to warnings, precisely because those warnings have been arriving so frequently. It is not irrationality. It is a fundamentally human adaptation to persistent stress signals. The brain begins to categorize the repeated alarm as background noise, as a feature of daily life rather than an urgent call to action. The problem with warning fatigue in the context of a marathon severe weather stretch is that it develops during the portion of the sequence that has not yet produced the worst event. The fatigue builds during the preparation, and the worst event, if it comes, arrives into a population that is less alert, less prepared, and less responsive than it was at the beginning of the stretch. This is the paradox at the heart of every extended severe weather period. The marathon itself, by its length and repetition, erodes the very capacity for response that would be needed if the final miles of the race turn out to be the most dangerous. The NWS Chicago office documented that by April 19th, the greater Chicago area had already experienced more tornado and severe thunderstorm watch coverage in 2026 than it typically records in an entire year. 14 separate convective watch events covering at least one county in the Chicago forecast area. The typical total for an entire year is between 10 and 20. They were approaching that ceiling by mid-April. I want to spend some time on what is actually inside these storms, because the numbers of tornadoes and the EF ratings tell only part of the story. The other part is what happens between the tornadoes. And in the 2026 marathon stretch, what happens between the tornadoes has been, in many ways, as damaging as the tornadoes themselves. The April 17th outbreak that hit Wisconsin and Illinois produced not only tornadoes, but flooding. The NWS Green Bay office documented flash flooding in Marathon County, Wisconsin, on the same evening as the tornadoes. Flash flooding is often the most underestimated hazard in severe weather events, not because it is subtle, but because it does not have the dramatic visual signature of a tornado. A tornado announces itself. It rotates. It has a visible funnel. It has a distinctive sound. Flash flooding often arrives as rapidly rising water in a place that was dry minutes before, moving faster than people expect, without any obvious indicator of its power until it has taken someone's car into a ditch or swept a pedestrian from a low water crossing. The April 14th through 15 event in Michigan and Wisconsin combined 88 mile-per-hour wind gusts, giant hail, tornadoes, and rain accumulations that triggered flood watches across multiple counties. That combination is more dangerous than any single hazard because it distributes the risk across the entire geographic area of the storm, not just along a narrow tornado path. Everyone in the storm's path is at risk from something, even if not from the same thing. Hail in the 2 to 4 inch range, which has been documented repeatedly across Oklahoma and Kansas during this stretch, causes economic damage on a scale that most people do not associate with thunderstorms. A single hail event covering a metropolitan area can total tens of thousands of vehicles, destroy roofing across entire subdivisions, and produce insurance claims that rival smaller tornado outbreaks in total dollar value. The 4-inch hailstone documented near Marion, Kansas, during the April 23rd event was not an outlier for this stretch. It was representative of the environment the atmosphere was producing, an environment where the energy available to storms was sufficient to loft ice to extraordinary sizes and carry it to the surface intact. Now I want to turn to the specific mechanism that makes Monday, April 27th, the day that forecasters are watching most closely, not just because it follows the rest of this stretch, but because of the specific atmospheric configuration that is coming together for that day. The Storm Prediction Center's discussion for Monday describes what meteorologists call a triple point low, a surface low-pressure system at the intersection of a dry line and a cold front. This configuration is significant because it concentrates the atmospheric forcing, the energy that drives storm initiation, at a single geographic point. When storms develop at a triple point low, they often do so quickly, explosively, and in an environment where wind shear, the change in wind speed and direction with altitude, is maximized. That wind shear is what gives storms their rotation. It is what separates a disorganized thunderstorm from a supercell capable of producing a violent, long-track tornado. The specific wind profile forecast for Monday includes 850 millibar winds, winds at about 5,000 feet above the surface, running at 40 to 50 knots from the south. That low-level southerly flow is the moisture transport mechanism. It pulls warm, humid air from the Gulf of Mexico northward into the warm sector ahead of the cold front. The moisture feeds the updrafts. The updrafts sustain the storms, and the wind shear at multiple levels of the atmosphere provides the rotation. The SPC discussion specifically mentions clockwise curved low-level hotographs, which is the technical way of describing a wind profile that is particularly favorable for producing the kind of long, curved tornado paths associated with the most destructive events. This is not marginal uncertainty language. When the SPC puts that kind of specificity into its public discussion document, it is communicating high confidence in the physical setup. The atmosphere is going to be capable of producing violent tornadoes. The question, as it always is whether the discrete supercells can maintain their structure long enough to tap that potential before being absorbed into a larger convective system. The forecast hinges on what happens Sunday. If Sunday's storms consume significant atmospheric energy and leave the environment depleted, Monday may underperform expectations. But the SPC is explicitly flagging the possibility that if Sunday's convective activity is limited, the untapped atmospheric energy could actually enhance Monday's potential, creating a scenario where the most dangerous phase of this entire marathon stretch is yet to come. There is something I want to say clearly because I think it matters more than any individual storm report or EF rating or hail size number. The marathon is not a series of independent events. It is one continuous process. It is the same atmospheric pattern, the same locked-in configuration of the jet stream and the temperature gradients and the Gulf moisture transport, expressing itself repeatedly through different storm systems over different days and different geographies. The specific outbreaks on April 14th, April 17th, April 23rd, April 25th, April 26, April 27 are not separate phenomena that happen to share a time period. They are chapters in a single atmospheric story that has been running since early spring. That distinction matters because it changes how communities should think about preparation. A single outbreak is an event you prepare for, survive, and recover from. A marathon is a condition you are living inside. Recovery from the April 17th tornadoes in Wisconsin was still underway when the April 23rd EF4 struck Enid. Cleanup in Enid's Gray Ridge neighborhood was still beginning when forecasters were issuing level 4 risks for Missouri and Illinois for the weekend. Emergency managers who spent resources and personnel on one event have to reconstitute those resources before the next event arrives. Infrastructure that was damaged in one storm has to be repaired, or at least stabilized, before another storm tests what remains. This is what makes the marathon genuinely different from an outbreak. An outbreak is an acute stress. A marathon is a chronic one. And the systems designed to protect people, the warning systems, the emergency management networks, the first responder capacity, the utility repair crews, all of them are built around the assumption of discrete events with recovery periods between them. When the recovery period disappears, when the next event arrives before the last one is fully processed, those systems are tested in ways they were not designed to be tested. I want to address something that comes up every time a severe weather stretch like this occurs, because I think it is important to be direct about it. People will ask whether this is evidence of climate change, making storms worse. And the honest answer is that the science on this specific question is more nuanced than either side of that debate usually acknowledges. What climate science does say with reasonable confidence is that a warmer atmosphere holds more moisture. More moisture means more energy available to thunderstorms. More energy means a greater potential for severe weather at the extreme end of the distribution. It does not necessarily mean more storms. It may mean that when storms occur, they have access to more fuel and can produce more intense rainfall, larger hail, and potentially stronger winds. What climate science does not yet say with the same confidence is that tornado frequency is increasing or that individual tornado outbreaks are directly attributable to climate change. Tornado climatology is complicated by changes in detection and reporting over time. The historical tornado record is not clean enough to draw firm trend lines. What we can say is that the geographic distribution of tornado activity has been shifting eastward, a trend that predates 2026, but that 2026 is reinforcing dramatically. Activity is moving from traditional Tornado Alley in the plains into what researchers now call Dixie Alley, the corridor running from Arkansas through Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee, and into the Midwest states of Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. The significance of that eastward shift is about population, not just physics. Population density in the Midwest and Dixie Alley is roughly 3 times higher than in the traditional Plains Tornado Alley. More people in the path means more exposure. It also means nighttime tornadoes are more dangerous because urban and suburban populations rely more heavily on electronic warnings and less on the physical cues, the sound, the darkness, the change in pressure that rural populations may have more experience reading. The 2026 marathon is not proof of climate change, but it is a vivid demonstration of what the combination of a favorable atmospheric pattern, a jet stream positioned over a densely populated region, and a La Nina to El Nino transition looks like when it runs without interruption for weeks. Here's the question I want you to sit with as we move toward what is still coming. Why does the marathon worry meteorologists specifically, beyond the obvious concern about individual storms? The answer is in the statistics. When you run a long sequence of severe weather days across the same general geographic region, you're repeatedly sampling from a probability distribution. Each day that a favorable severe weather environment exists is another draw from that distribution. Most draws produce significant but manageable events. Tornadoes? Yes. Hail? Yes. Flooding? Yes. But manageable events that cause damage and disrupt lives without producing mass casualties. Some draws, however, produce the tail events, the EF5 that tracks through a city, the outbreak that puts 50 tornadoes on the ground in a 6-hour window over a metropolitan area, the derecho, a line of storms that maintains hurricane-force wind gusts across hundreds of miles that takes out power for 1 million people at once. Those tail events are rare, but the more draws you take from the distribution, the more likely it becomes that one of those draws will land on a tail event. A marathon means more draws. More draws means the probability of experiencing a tail event, the truly catastrophic one, increases as the sequence continues. That is why Brandon Buckingham's word matters. The marathon is not just exhausting. The marathon is statistically more dangerous the longer it runs, not because any individual day is necessarily more dangerous than the day before it, but because the cumulative probability of a catastrophic event rises with each additional day that the atmospheric pattern remains favorable. Meteorologists are not alarmed by any single storm in this sequence, as violent as some of them have been. They are alarmed by the sequence itself, by its length, by its persistence, by the fact that it is still running as of today, and that Monday still looks like the most dangerous day yet. So where does this leave us right now? Today, April 26, 2026, on a Sunday when more storms are developing across the Central Plains, and the most potent phase of the stretch may still be 24 hours away. The Storm Prediction Center's forecast for tonight through Monday shows the surface, cyclone that will drive Monday's outbreak currently intensifying over the Central Plains. The dry line is positioned across Kansas and Oklahoma. The cold front is approaching from the west. Moisture from the Gulf is flowing north. Every ingredient that has been producing dangerous storms for 2 weeks is present and intensifying. The Weather Prediction Center has flagged excessive rainfall concerns for the Central Plains through Monday, with rates that could produce flash flooding in areas already saturated from prior storm systems. The combination of severe weather aloft and flooding at the surface is the full package, the scenario that tests every layer of community resilience simultaneously. For Illinois specifically, emergency managers have been advised that Monday's level 4 moderate risk, with its explicit potential for EF3 or stronger long-track tornadoes, warrants activation of full preparedness protocols. School administrators have been recommended to reassess Monday plans as the forecast sharpens. Residents in mobile homes, which provide no meaningful protection against any tornado-rated EF2 or stronger, are being urged by the National Weather Service to identify shelter locations before Monday afternoon. The outdoor plans of tens of millions of people across the central United States are being evaluated against a forecast that carries the explicit language of the highest confidence: significant, severe weather setup of the season. That phrase is not hedged. It is a declaration of confidence. It means the atmospheric conditions are not borderline or dependent on uncertain model outputs. The setup is clear. The environment will be capable. Whether a tornado that reaches a city does so before or after a warning, whether it tracks over a populated neighborhood or a cornfield, whether it stays on the ground for 2 miles or 20 miles, those are the remaining uncertainties. The setup itself is not uncertain. I want to end where we began, with the word marathon. Brandon Buckingham used that word to communicate something that the standard language of weather forecasting does not capture. He used it because no other word describes what has happened and what is still coming. Not storm, not outbreak, not event, marathon. Because a marathon is not defined by any single mile, it is defined by the cumulative distance, by the persistence of effort and the wearing down of reserves, by the fact that the finish line is not yet visible and the runner has no certain knowledge of when the running will end. The Central United States has been running this marathon since early March. The EF OSPA 5 in Indiana on March 10th. The relentless Illinois outbreak season that produced 99 confirmed tornadoes before April was half over. The April 14th flooding and wind damage in Michigan and Wisconsin. The April 17th tornadoes in Marathon County, Wisconsin, and across the Midwest. The April 23rd EF4 that erased neighborhoods in Enid, Oklahoma, and shut down a military airbase. The hail reports of 4 inches. The satellite tornadoes. The 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts. The ground stop at O'Hare. The flood watches. And the road closures, and the school cancellations, and the emergency declarations. All of that, and now Monday is coming. A level 4 risk for Illinois. Discrete supercells in northeastern Missouri, southeastern Iowa, northwestern Illinois. Long-track tornadoes possible. Chicago in the risk zone. St. Louis, Indianapolis, Memphis. Tens of millions of people in a corridor where the atmosphere has repeatedly proved this spring that it is capable of extraordinary violence. The marathon is not over. It may be, in the next 24 to 48 hours, entering its most dangerous mile. The weather system does not care about fatigue. It does not care that communities are still clearing debris from the last event. It does not care that emergency crews have been working double shifts for weeks. It does not care that the phones of 80 million people have been lighting up with tornado watches so frequently that some percentage of those people have begun treating the alerts as background noise rather than urgent commands to act. The atmosphere has been building towards something all spring. The jet stream has been sitting over the wrong part of the map for the wrong zip codes. The moisture has been flowing. The shear has been organizing. And on Monday, every one of those ingredients will reach what forecasters are describing as peak alignment, the highest confidence setup of the season, over a region that is already tired, already recovering, and already carrying the psychological weight of weeks of living inside this marathon. The word marathon is not dramatic, it is accurate. And accuracy, when the atmosphere is organizing for another major severe weather event over a densely populated region that is already being tested, is the most important thing a meteorologist can offer. Stay informed. Know your shelter. Have a plan that does not depend on having time to figure one out. Because in this marathon, the next mile may be the most dangerous one yet, and it may be arriving before the sun sets on Monday. The atmosphere is not done. The question is whether we are ready.